Good. Okay, so today's webinar is when to consider an AAC device for your child, and it's going to be a guide for parents, caregivers on AAC, which is augmentative and alternative communication. And let me go ahead and move forward here with a little bit of information about North Shore Pediatric Therapy. So the services that we provide are applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, speech and feeding therapy, occupational therapy, mental health services and counseling, physical therapy, and then neuropsych evaluations, including our early autism testing clinic, which we have 4 different locations for. We have 12 centers throughout the Chicagoland area, all the way up from Lake Bluff down to Naperville and Woodridge. And then if you are interested in contacting us about, any more questions about our services, or to speak on services or request appointments for neuropsych or for ABA or anything like that, we do have our information listed on the screen here. You can give us a call. You can email us at info@nspt4kids.com. Or if you're just interested in learning more, you can go to our website, nspt4kids.com. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenters today. So we have Betty Lupia, who is one of our speech language pathologists at our Lake Bluff Clinic. And then we have Dana Ignarski, who is one of our BCBAs at our Lake Bluff Clinic as well. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pass it off to them. And once again, if you have any questions that you want to ask our presenters today, feel free to put it in the chat, and then we'll answer them at the end. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to you guys.
Thanks for having us. So I'm going to go over our agenda today. So today's topic is AAC devices and communication modalities. So we're going to go over what is AAC, its definition, types of modalities, myths and misconceptions that often follow AAC, as well as signs that a child would benefit from an AAC evaluation. We're also going to go over how to get the process started for funding a communication device, teaching and modeling AAC use both at home and in other settings. And we're also going to go over how speech, OT, and ABA work together for AAC users. So what is AAC? AAC is an area of clinical practice that supplements or compensates for impairments in speech and language production and or comprehension, including spoken and written modes of communication. AAC falls under the broader umbrella of assistive technology, or the use of any equipment, tool, or strategy to improve functional daily living in individuals with disabilities or limitations. So what can AAC look like? AAC falls under 2 major categories for us. It can be no tech or low tech, or mid tech or high tech. We also call this aided versus unaided technologies. So unaided would be communication modalities such as gestures or sign language, anything that doesn't need extra tools to help communicate. Aided language is using anything else such as picture cards, communication boards, or a speech generating device. It's also important to note that a lot of the times a child will be a multimodal communicator, so they may choose 2 or 3 of these modes in which to communicate. It's important to note that a child doesn't need to choose just one of these to communicate. AAC is meant to be a tool in which to supplement expression as a whole. So let's go over some very common myths and misconceptions around AAC. So oftentimes when parents hear that my child may need a device, there may be some thoughts that pop up and concerns. So the biggest misconception that we often see is my child will not learn to speak if they use an AAC device. So a 2006 review of previously published studies included, among other factors, data on speech and language production before, during, and after AAC intervention between the years 1975 and 2003. So it was a kind of a long longitudinal study of AAC use for clients. Their findings showed that speech production either remained unchanged or showed a significant improvement. And this is also what I personally see in my clinical practice, that oftentimes when we implement a device or other tools, children will eventually pick up either verbal approximations or verbalize those words that we're modeling for them. So another common misconception we see is my child is not ready for AAC, or my child needs prerequisite skills for AAC use. So the reality is, for young children, there's no prerequisite skills that they need to use communication supports, whether it's high tech or low tech. As we consider AAC for young children, studies suggest intervention should target multiple modes of communication, such as vocalizations, gestures, and low technology systems that have fewer learning demands, as well as focus on appropriate instructions for teaching high-tech communication use. So at times we may implement a lower tech option to start kids off, but that doesn't always have to be the case. You can start off with a high-tech speech generating device to help supplement your child's communication. The other myth we often see, if my child has some words, they don't need AAC. So even if a child does have verbal speech, their speech may not be enough to meet their communication needs daily. Their form of verbalization could be inconsistent, unreliable, or ineffective in everyday life. AAC use is another way to both supplement and promote more efficient and reliable verbal communication, as well as communication on the device. We often have clients here who will engage in both immediate and delayed echolalia. And while at times that can meet certain wants and needs in their daily life, at times it really doesn't. So AAC in the form of a communication board or speech generating device really helps give those additional auditory and visual cues to help our kids really meet those wants and needs more effectively. All right, so signs your child should be evaluated for a communication device. Here are some things that we often see as speech pathologists when a child's coming in. So my child has difficulty expressing basic wants and needs. My child has a few words, but continues to have difficulty communicating functionally. I want my child to engage more with us, and my child has difficulty physically producing words. So it's also important to note, and I get asked often, does my child need a previous diagnosis of any other developmental disability to be eligible for an AAC evaluation? And no, if you feel like there's a gap in your child's ability to meet their wants and needs, they're absolutely eligible to go through an AAC evaluation. So how do I get this process started? So an SLP is really going to be your point person for going over communication modalities and working with a durable medical equipment company to get you started with a high-tech device. SLPs are also going to be the person who can give you those additional low-tech supports as well. If you're not already working with a speech language pathologist, make sure to ask your pediatrician for a speech referral. So honestly, even in your first session with an SLP, you can ask like, hey, I noticed my child has a lot of trouble communicating. Can we get started with some sort of AAC, whether it's low tech or high tech? BCBAs also play an important role in this. So once you're working with a BCBA and ABA services, you can ask them about getting a speech therapy referral or ask about what other communication supports they can provide. Families can choose to go through insurance to cover a dedicated communication device, which your SLP will help you with that process. But families can also choose to get a communication application on a personal device. And I'll show you some more of those in the next slide. So how is your SLP going to help with this process? So your SLP will walk you through the options of devices, vocabulary systems, and other medically necessary accessories, such as cases, touch guards, wheelchair mounts, or eye gaze systems. We really value family input, and we really try to make this as customized to each child and their needs. So your SLP is also going to guide you through the process of getting a device covered by insurance, evaluating your child for the best system, and writing up a comprehensive report detailing device, vocabulary, and any other accessories they may need. So we typically trial 2 to 3 different systems to really find the right fit for your child. And this process can take anywhere from 3 to 8 months, just depending on your child's needs and also what your insurance requires. All right, so let's get into how do we use AAC. Your golden ticket is going to be modeling. This is how you're going to get your child to communicate functionally and how you're also going to learn the system. So what is modeling? Modeling means that you point to the words on the AAC tool as you speak. You can model throughout the day, model different reasons to communicate, not just requests. So I brought my handy dandy core board to kind of show things that you can model. You can model things like emotions, like I feel tired or I feel happy. You can also model things like wants and needs. So it's like, I want a drink. So you simply just show your child and you kind of model along as they're doing things. So modeling in conversations and natural interactions really gives children that additional auditory support and also visual cues to build that communication. Making modeling an early habit really not only expands your child's acquisition of the device, but also makes your knowledge of it even greater. So here's some quick facts about modeling. So AAC users really need to see their system in use. As stated before, making modeling a habit is going to be a game changer for language acquisition for your child. Your child only knows the system as well as you know it. So just get familiar with it. Honestly, I honestly tell parents, like, just take a few minutes a day and like think of something in your mind that you want to say and say it on the device or on the core board yourself. Typically, children will hear a word 1,000 times before they actually use it themselves. And that same exact concept applies to AAC. So also, I always remind parents is don't get concerned if your child is not picking up on novel words super quickly. AAC honestly takes quite a few months of consistent use, but with more consistent use, kids honestly do pick it up. A fun acronym that I always remind people of is SMORES. So here's some things to just keep in mind while you're modeling is go slow, consistently model, respect, and reflect. So reflect on the things that your child is pointing to. Repeat often. Kids love repetition. It really does help. Expand. So let's say your child's just using the word eat. Maybe you're filling in what they're eating. Looks like you're eating Cheetos. And stop, making sure you're pausing and giving your child time to use the system themselves. So tips to modeling at home. I often say put the fun in functional. So use it during everyday routines such as bath time, meal time. Here's some of our friends at our clinic using it during mealtime to say things like more and all done and choose which foods they want. I always tell parents, because parents sometimes can be overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have to model every little thing for my kid. But I always tell them, make it a part of your routine. Choose certain routines to make it a part of, and then it becomes less daunting then. Narrate and model, again, narrate what your child's doing, narrate what you're doing. And motivation is key. So I always tell parents, like, add really motivating things to your child's device, like their favorite characters, their favorite shows, their favorite foods, their favorite activities. Once your child realizes that they can use this to request their favorite things, it really is like a light clicks. And then they know that, like, oh, I use this and I get what I want. I can communicate what I actually want. So here's some fun activities to try and things we often do around the clinic and how you can easily do it at home. Making sensory bins, like filled with beads and with sand. During water play, our kids love using their devices and core words during water play to press more and say splash or to pour. Scavenger hunts. The other day, I did a really fun scavenger hunt with 2 of my clients to find things of different colors on their device and find things like flower and rock and grass. Reading books is another great way to model on a device. And of course, watching your favorite shows. I always tell parents, make screen time work for you and make screen time like valuable to you guys. So you can model the characters, what the characters are doing in the show. I had one mom say that that's like one of her favorite parts of the day now is modeling during a show with her child. So now I'm going to pass it on to Dana because truly what makes this work is working as a team in our clinic to make sure our clients are using their communication systems effectively.
Thanks, Betty. All right, teamwork makes the dream work. So BCBAs also see the value in using AAC devices to increase expressive language during ABA therapy. So it's always a joy to collaborate with Betty in practice. So we always learn so much from each other and our clients make more progress as well. So here are some of the reasons I also promote the use of an AAC device to support growth of functional language. So why recommend an AAC? So BCBAs look at language through a different lens. The question that I answer when I start treatment is, how can I get this person their needs met through language? without the need to engage in inappropriate behaviors. Because usually, if you engage in ABA therapy, there is a behavioral component, right? Where they're getting their needs met through behaviors instead of through that functional communication piece. So that's a big emphasis that I focus on first of all. So the communication response is the most important replacement behavior that BCBAs teach to get their individual needs met. So just to recap, our behaviors serve 4 different functions or combinations of functions, which are access to tangibles. So we want something, right? A cookie, to get escape from something. So maybe we need a break from a work task, to get attention from another person, or to get some sensory needs met. We can teach a variety of different functions of language. Requesting, labeling, answering, asking questions, all of that. AAC devices support them all. So typically, when I start using an AAC device or start teaching functional communication, I start by teaching requesting. And then it's great to start seeing the behaviors, the communication response replace the inappropriate behaviors, because you see that individual think, wow, that was easy. I can just ask for this cookie instead of needing to scream, cry, right? And then we teach that new pattern of responding over and over, replacing that inappropriate to appropriate. And then once we start there and we're realizing like, wow, I can ask for this and I get this, really cool. That's a really motivating part of language. Then I like to expand and teach labeling nouns and verbs. And then that's the basis of the building blocks of describe language, right? So then your child can eventually explain, well, what did you do in school today, right? And you can explain and narrate all these things. Eventually, another function, asking, answering questions, right? Do you want this? Yes or no? What's your name? So we want to teach that an AAC device is not just the means to get the things that we need, but we can use that language to do so many different things. So that's what's really awesome. AAC devices are recommended for all verbal abilities, as AAC devices can support a variety of needs: non-speaking, emergently speaking, or those individuals with strong verbal language. All right, and what I love about AAC devices is that they are a built-in prompting system. And they also empower individuals and they foster independence with language. So when you use only verbal prompts to teach language, that client can become dependent on prompts, as verbal prompts can be hard to fade. Because you can whisper, you could say something quietly, you can maybe do a phonemic prompt, but that individual is reliant on someone else to cue them into what to say or to give them that language, right? So what I love about an AAC is that you can use model or gesture prompts just to teach that language, and that the individual's learning how to manage their own prompting system. And they can take that with them anywhere, whether that be picture exchange, a core board like Betty, a demonstrator, showed to you guys, or something with an application on an iPad. So we're empowering them to learn their own prompting system instead of them needing someone else to help them supplement their language. And that's one of my favorite things about an AAC device. And then to speak about the picture, the caption, one picture is worth 1,000 words. And I truly do believe that. I truly feel like that's really helps the clients that we serve access language, is because they have that visual. It funnels in all of the possibilities at their fingertips, and it really helps them acquire language in a very beautiful way. Right. The last point that I want to make about AAC use is generalize the use of an AAC device. And I'm going to really hit home with this because it's so important. Similar to what Betty had said, make the time. Just regularly practice using the AAC device, create opportunities to learn. The picture there captioned, it said opening the door. So we were working on labeling actions with one of our clients, and it just so happened he wanted to go into the big gym with all the cool equipment and independently said opening the door. And we were like, oh my goodness, right? So have fun, use motivators to request or talk about preferred things. That's the most important thing, because if you do it in a fun context, of course, right, they're going to want to use it because they're understanding I can get my needs met and it's fun. And then eventually carve out more time for more of those meaningful opportunities. So just like anything else, we just need to practice. We need to practice to learn those skills. ABA is very much like going to the gym. That repetition is what makes our treatment effective. So taking 15 minutes a day to dedicate time to practice is what I tend to recommend. Or like Betty said, if prompting every single request is overwhelming, just focus on one thing. Maybe work on it only in meal times where you can prompt eat, you can prompt drink, or help to open something, all done. And that might seem a little less daunting. And once you get your footing there, introduce maybe a bedtime routine, and then just keep expanding it until it becomes part of your everyday life. Generalize across environments and settings and include different people. It is so important that, especially with our learners, you have to make sure that we're not only working on using an AAC in just one setting. We want to practice it with other people in other environments and settings, because sometimes that generalization piece needs to be intentional in order to really truly learn that skill. Because if that person only learns how to use an AAC device in only one context and with one person, we didn't do our jobs, right? We want to make sure that that device use can supplement their communication needs and go with them wherever they need to go. So you always are thinking, okay, real life scenario, what could happen if? How can I get my child to communicate in those situations? Family gatherings is a great part. Time to practice those. I had a client that would only use this device in school, right? Or only use this device in therapy. So at home, and he would not use it. I would coach parents through all these different things to try. And finally, I just started going on outings with them in the community. And we had fun. We went to Barnes and Noble because he loved books. So then we would have him request on his device, okay, where do you want to go? And of course it was Barnes and Noble. And then we went in and there's Starbucks, and he loves hot chocolate. So then we would ask for hot chocolate. And over time, once we started practicing that in a community setting, he started to see the value of using that everywhere, right? And then started generalizing at home too. So that's another example. I always like to say, just to make sure to generalize that in all different settings, because sometimes if routines are broken, this could cause an individual to become upset, right? Like, well, what's going on? I always communicate in this way, right? So now you're asking me to do this, and it's nice to just expand that from the very beginning. And then my last point, use as needed. For those emerging verbal communicators, be diligent about prompting responses on an AAC when any articulation could be unclear. So you could just be like, oh, I didn't catch that, or I didn't understand. Can you tell me on here? And then gesture to their AAC device. So I have a client that she tends to say the word for purple is people. So we're teaching colors, and she would say people, and I would say, what? I think I know what you're saying, but tell me on here. And then is really great about accepting the prompts and being like, it's purple. Would say it and be like, oh, I understand. Because not everyone is going to know how your child articulates certain words as they grow and acquire more language. When you're in it, it's hard because you have an ear and it's really in tune to how they communicate and how they verbalize. But it's nice to test that with other people and other environments and contingencies, because then you know to be diligent about always redirecting to that iPad or the AAC as needed. Because in that situation, there was a new staff that worked with this client, and she was calm. She was able to accept the prompts to use the iPad, where in some cases, if that isn't taught from the beginning, to know to use that as a tool for themselves, that individual could become upset, because again, it's more of a change in routine, right? So just wanted to give a tidbit there. Prompting, responding on an AAC is just such a functional response pattern that can serve them in a variety of situations. So that's what I have to say about generalizing.
Yeah, Dina, you brought up a lot of really great points about making sure we understand that like kids can use their device in other settings. We oftentimes get asked, I hear they're using their device at the clinic, but they're not using it at home. So making sure that parents understand that like the contingency is like, hey, we got to model it at home so that your child knows that like this is something you can use it at home too. It's okay to communicate with this there as well. So you hit on a lot of really great points there. So we're also going to go over how occupational therapy can also assist with AAC, because they also play a really important role. So OTs assist with fine motor positioning as well as visual motor aspects of AAC operation. They can also play a part in recommending various accessories to help make these devices more accessible, such as switch systems, touch guards, mounting systems for wheelchairs. They also work on that kind of fine motor piece of helping our friends make sure they're pointing their finger, selecting correct cells, and just operating the device the way it should be. They're also going to ensure that vocabulary related to daily living skills are going to be included in their vocabulary. Me and the occupational therapist in Lake Bluff, we often make sure that our clients have access to words like toothbrush, toothpaste, making sure we have everything we need in the bathroom and we have the vocabulary accessible to make sure we can request things in the bathroom, or making sure we can request our preferred fidgets if we need a sensory break. So they also play a really important role in helping our kids access communication, as well as making sure their daily living skills and needs are met. Here are some helpful resources I wanted to include. The website for Assistive Wear gives parents a lot of really great tools for using their AAC device at home, as well as really important studies to read up on AAC use and how beneficial it is. AAC Learning Journey is another great website for activities to do at home. The Center for AAC and Autism is also an amazing site. They provide a lot of trainings, both in person and virtually, for AAC use for parents. And also PRC Saltillo is one of the large durable medical equipment companies that we often get devices or other vocabulary systems from. So they're also going to give you a lot of really great information on what devices are out there and what insurance will cover for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for presenting. Next, we're going to go into some questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, but I just want to do another quick disclaimer that since our clinicians won't be able to provide specific recommendations for each individual child's situation without adequate assessment or knowing a lot about the situation, they won't be able to provide specific recommendations. So if you have, a scenario with your child, please feel free to reach out to us for help, and we can get you started with an assessment with one of our speech language pathologists, or getting started in services, or even provide information on if your insurance is covered by our services, all of that information. We do give complimentary insurance checks as well before you start services. So our information is listed once again below if you're interested in speaking with a clinician or consulting or starting services. Our phone number, as well as our email address and website. So let's go ahead and I'm going to check our chat right now and see if we have any questions. Okay, so it looks like we have one question that is basically, how do you explain the AAC device and its purpose to other children, perhaps like your child's siblings or friends? And I feel like it would also be good to include like family members too, and like how do you maybe get your family members involved?
That is a great question. And we oftentimes will have other kids here ask like, well, why are they using that? Or like, why didn't they respond? Oftentimes my response is, well, they're still learning how to communicate, or they use that device to help them communicate what they want. And oftentimes like our kids will really show interest in it, and they'll kind of show interest in like how our other kids use the device. So oftentimes it's just kind of that learning process of like, well, this person, everyone's a little different. We use different ways to communicate. And this person just happens to use a device to help them communicate.
That's also what I say too. And I also like to have them watch and be like, watch, isn't this cool? You can talk to them about things or watch how they are able to use it. And I also emphasize that everyone communicates differently. And they just need maybe that to help them. Was the other part of the question about family involvement? Could you repeat the?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what would maybe like your tips or recommendations of like, let's say you're going to a family outing or something like that, like how would you explain that to an adult family member? And like, how would you maybe get them involved with using the AAC device with your child?
Sometimes when I explain it to adults, I kind of say like it's no different than like a wheelchair or a hearing aid. Like it's kind of meant to be like a medically necessary tool to help like build my child's communication. Also just like from a communication standpoint for the child, like I always try to consult with families to make sure important family members are on the device. So when they go to those gatherings, like their child can identify the family members and say like, hi, Aunt so and so, like on their device. And then I feel like that family member like also then shows interest because like, oh, I'm included in this.
Yeah, that's a great way to get family involved. Greetings, identifying different people. Sometimes if your child is at that point, answering some questions of maybe what's your favorite color, those can be kind of fun. Or just simple requests too. So just for them to be able to see that impact, I think modeling it and showing them how it helps that individual is really valuable as well. It's as much as you can talk about it, like, hey, let me show you. This is really helpful for my child. And then I usually will show them, and then I'll be like, you want to try it? Let's see. Okay, let's get something really cool. Let's set up a situation that we can have and practice that to get them involved too. Because sometimes if you just model it once and then you have help them through how to use it, it'll just kind of ease that barrier too.
And then we have another question that is, what apps have you used with children and which would you recommend and why? Maybe there's different apps, and you kind of went through this, Betty, too, of like, there are different devices, there's high tech, low tech. What are some examples that you would recommend for what situations?
So it really depends on the individual needs of each child. Honestly, most of the time in my sessions, I pull out like a 4-board like this, sometimes a little more simple, just so I can get a gauge on like, hey, do they kind of understand what I'm pointing? Like they can point to, and like, are they attending to this? As far as like what apps like I personally recommend, again, not an easy answer because it really depends on the need of the child. We trial like 2 to 3 different apps and systems to see which one really sticks. I will say 2 of the ones that are the most accessible because you can buy them on iOS is Lamp Words for Life and Touch Chat with Word Power. Those 2 are the most accessible. But again, sometimes we start with a system and we kind of notice like it's not a great fit, so then we try something else, and that's totally fine. But I would say those 2 apps are the most accessible.
Yeah, I think I don't have the wealth of knowledge that Betty has with AAC devices, but if a family just purchases their own device, what are really easily modified and accessible are the ProLoquo to Go and Touch Chat. I feel like you could customize them, you can individualize them, include, and a lot of the devices are like that. And then Betty, you introduced a new one recently, the Nuvo
Yeah,
app.
Nuvo device with Grid. So the app is
Love
Grid.
that.
I'll have to double check. I believe that also may be available on iOS, but that one's super customizable. We also kind of separate like our communication and vocabulary systems into like motor planning based and kind of more of a bit of a more customized base. So like motor planning is you're teaching more of single words at a time. You're teaching a sequence of buttons rather than relying on the child to kind of understand where do I find foods and where do I find animals. You're teaching more of that sequence like you kind of do with typing. again, your SLP is going to be able to kind of walk you through like, how do I make that decision for my child? And like, what system is going to be like, for the long term, be the most beneficial for them.
And then I'm wondering too, if it might be helpful again for parents, if you can go through again, kind of those signs and the indicators that their child might be they might benefit from an AAC device. Maybe you can go back and talk about that a little bit more, expand on it. Just like, what are the common signs you see, and what are you hearing a lot from parents that they come to you and they say, you know, whatever the situation might be, what are the most common, I guess, scenarios or like indicators that a kiddo might benefit from an AAC device?
So some concerns that I hear from parents often is usually by 18 months of age, which is when your pediatrician will recommend SLP services. Usually what I hear is my child's not producing any words, or they produce 1 or 2 words, but they're not really like mimicking what I say. That's mostly for younger kids. Usually when I have a kid that's like 3, 4, maybe even 5, parents will often say, well, they say 1 or 2 words sporadically, and then, but sometimes they only just repeat back what I say, and they're not independently initiating any additional communication themselves. So those are kind of some of the things that I often hear. Again, usually in those first sessions, I'll pull out like a core board, or even sometimes if I feel like the kid can really attend and utilize it, I'll also bring out just like an extra device and see like, okay, let's see here. Like, let's see if we can get some more functional communication from you. So I always kind of like to think about it as like, there's physical communication, then there's also like functional communication. Even if they're just saying some of those words, like, is it meeting their functional needs?
Yeah, and similarly, to touch on that point, usually there's a behavioral component to language. So what I would recommend it is if we do have to replace a maladaptive or inappropriate behavior to replace language, and that person isn't responding to just like a model or a verbal prompt. Because usually over time, you can tell, you get an understanding of their pattern of acquisition and how they learn language. And if you're not able to fade those prompts at a certain point in time, and that depends on every person, right? But that's when I start thinking about, okay, I think we need a little extra help. I think they need a system of language to help them communicate, instead of just relying on someone else prompting, right? And also too, with the articulation piece, I think Betty had mentioned before, I had a client as well with apraxia. It's a lot of verbal language, but sometimes it's just hard to access that language. So sometimes all she needs to do is click open and look at the home screen and see the grid, and that helps her access the language she needs to get her needs met. So just a couple other examples.
Yeah, and like I said, Dana hit on like a lot of those really important points where 9 times out of 10 with our kids, like there is a behavioral component to where like there's some gap in their communication that needs to be filled. So she hit on a lot of really great points with there where parents will see like my child just screams all the time, or they guide my hand to something and they just put it on it. I'm not sure what they're asking for. So those are some other really great opportunities for us to like utilize AAC to like request for help, request to open, request to stop. So that, like Dana said, we're kind of replacing some of those behaviors we might see with communication.
Awesome, great. I think that's all the questions we have so far. Is there anything else you want to expand on or include, or any other resources for parents, anything like that?
I also just want to really touch base and like hit home again that like a lot of the times our kids are multimodal communicators. So we'll often see our kids use the sign for more, but then they'll use their device to say juice. Or they'll say juice and then they'll use their device to say open please. So again, really honoring all modes of communication is super important. Just because they use the sign for more doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like make them say it on the device or verbally too. So we want to honor like how they're using communication functionally. If they're using it functionally, honor it.
It's a great one. Something else I would love to touch on, and I realized I didn't get to explain the captions on, could you go to slide 18?
Yeah. I can't see the number, so you'll have to tell me when to stop.
That's it.
Wait, this one? Okay.
Yep. So it's really awesome that the AAC and what your child needs, it evolves as they grow as communicators. So we share a client, Betty and I, and when we first engaged in ABA services, we started with that top caption, just a basic picture board, right? And we quickly realized that talking with Betty, well, eventually we wanted to transition everything, the communication over to an application at some point in time. So instead of grabbing the picture and doing the whole exchange, we just taught a couple very simple requests like go or all done, sippy cup, right? And we would just prompt that person to touch, right? And then we would model let's go, or I want the cup. And eventually we are now at that bottom caption where it's a laminated screen of what an AAC, what the software would look like on an iPad. And it's really individualized. Betty did such a great job. All of that client's favorite activities and foods, core words like stop, more, all done. So now we're operating and using that with some prompting and fading prompts. And eventually we're going to switch to using the actual software on an iPad. So it's really awesome how these systems can evolve over time. And if you have that intuition, like, I think my child's like ready to grow, or they can, if you're always searching for words and they're not listed on there, just get in touch with your SLP, because it could just mean that your vocabulary needs to grow a little bit, or they're ready to move on to that next set. Just to keep challenging them and teaching them as their communication develops.
Yeah, Dana, I'm really glad you shared this. So a lot of the green words on here are core words, so they make up like the bulk of this client's vocabulary. Oftentimes when you will see a device system, they'll have core words or sometimes the verbs in green. So they'll kind of like separate those words into categories. So core words make up the bulk of our communication day to day, and more specified words maybe in blue or white. So those are really specific things that this client likes. So Dana, I really like how you're talking about how it evolved. So people may be asking like, so why are we starting with low tech for this client? It's the most accessible thing right now. This client still kind of requires some prompting to utilize these things. So having a nice low tech option is a very accessible way for every single person on his team and at home to use it, because they can carry it around everywhere. We have kind of dabbled with a high tech device with this client. He's not quite showing interest in it yet, but he is showing interest in the low tech option. So once this client starts really communicating like effectively with like multiple words on his board, that's usually a sign to me as a speech pathologist. Okay, let's take that next step. Let's introduce the device and see if now we're getting it and now we can utilize that functionally.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much to our presenters today, and thanks everyone for joining. I did launch a poll on here if you want to answer before we head off today about any future, if you have ideas for future webinar topics, anything like that that you're looking forward to us presenting in the future. Also, we will be sending a recording of this webinar as well. So to whatever email you use to sign up for the webinar through Eventbrite, we'll be sending it probably on Monday morning with the recording of the webinar. It does look like we have one more question, which before we go, and it's what is the average age to move from low tech to high tech? And I'm sure it depends, but maybe you could talk
No age, no age. I have clients as young as 2 using high tech, and I have clients who are still, you know, at age 5, 6 using low tech. Again, that's really something you're going to want to work with your SLP on, and like getting their opinions on like, okay, what's the next step? What do you think my child can kind of handle right now? And like, what are they using the most consistently? But there's absolutely no age. Again, going back, there's absolutely no prerequisites. We usually, and even with this client, again, I'm really happy Dana used him as an example, but we kind of threw everything at him. We used PECs, we used core boards, we used a device. And again, the core board right now is kind of what he's taken off with. And we want to make sure our clients feel confident in what they're using and feel like, oh yes, I can use this. And I'm like motivated to use it and I feel confident in my ability to use it before we start introducing things that they may feel less confident and less motivated to use in that moment.
Yeah, I agree. Up until a year ago, I was working with I had an adult client that needed the voice recorded buttons. What were those called, Betty?
Switch systems.
Yeah, a switch system to communicate, and there were 4, and because of that fine motor difficulty and the needs of that individual, that was how they were able to communicate. So I think it also depends on how they initiate, right, with the high tech. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to what you're looking at when they're ready to switch to high tech. Maybe that could also help answer the question too. Because when you probe through different sessions, I think you're also looking for, Betty, engagement with how
Yeah.
they interact with the high tech devices. Maybe you can speak to a little bit more of what you're looking for before you make that jump.
So again, it's them consistently and understanding that like using this provides a function. Like I can use this to comment on how I feel. I can use this to request a specific item. So once they're kind of using a system like consistently and functionally, that's when I might either, try a high-tech system or bump up their high-tech system. Me and Dana have a client who started off with kind of a smaller grid set on his device. He was super consistent with requesting things and commenting on things. So I was like, okay, we're meeting a lot of the goals I've written. We're really using this for multiple communicative functions. Let's bump him up to a bigger grid set where he has access to even more words so we can teach more. So those are some of the things I kind of look for in my sessions to say, okay, how can we kind of quote unquote challenge our clients more to use more words?
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much. If you haven't already, if you have a webinar topic, please feel free to put it in the poll. I just want to go over our services one more time before we end here. Once again, we're with North Shore Pediatric Therapy, and we do a bunch of different services, including obviously speech language pathology and applied behavioral analysis, like our presenters today. But we also provide other services, including neuropsychological testing. We have 12 locations throughout the Chicagoland area, and we are always available if you want to call us, send us an email. You can also go to our website and do a contact form there as well. And one of our intake team members will be happy to reach out to you and answer any questions you might have if you're interested in starting services or just have general questions about it. So feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, thank you guys so much for presenting today, and thank you all for attending. Hope you have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.